they need to ideally ask the question, how much of this budget goes into security, just to be also protected against incompliance and, regulation and stuff like that, because that ultimately goes up to the C-level or to the board even if there's violation. I do believe that this question is not often asked.
Welcome to SAP Cybersecurity by NoMonkey, where we are tackling SAP security together, where we break down the complexities of SAP cybersecurity and make them real, relevant, and actionable. I'm your host, Wasim Ajrab from NoMonkey, and every episode we explore the threats, innovations, and strategies shaping the future of SAP cybersecurity. Whether you're deep in the technical trenches or leading at the C-level, this is where we talk openly about what it really takes to protect the systems that run your business. All right, let's dive in. Christoph, it's great to have you on the show, and I'm really looking forward to discussing or at least explaining SAP cyber risk to the board. Of course, at least to the board, to the C-levels, to where this kind of topics actually is addressed. Without scaring them, I would like to hear your opinion. I know that you have discussed this with a lot of C-levels, discussed this with a lot of different teams before. But before we start digging into this, and for our listeners who might not know who you are, who is Christoph? And one question, a follow-up, is what led you into SAP security?
Well, first and foremost, Wasim, thanks for having me. I think that's, I am really excited to be here today. Well, that's actually a longer story, but let me start with the short story who I am. Yeah, so I'm Christoph Nagy. I'm one of two founders of Security Bridge, and I led the company from the day one in 2012 until now, actually. Yeah, and now I'm in the supervisory board, and I hand it over to an executive management. Mm-hmm. How did I come into a SAP security? That's actually a good story, because I met my business partner in a project, in an SAP project. So I have a technical background. Actually, I'm a software engineer, and we just clicked. We understood that there is a lot to do in the SAP space when it comes to software and automation. And I think overall, we were just lazy people. We wanted to fix problems by automation. We wanted to have them permanently fixed, no workarounds. And I think that this underlying mantra has been very interesting and pushy for us in the area of cybersecurity. While we met, I have to be transparent with you, we haven't focused on SAP security. So we started our journey as a software company in the area of SAP, and we then figured out that SAP security is a huge white spot back in it. Yeah, so 2012 I'm speaking about. And after all, it was very inspirational conversations with IT security or information security leaders that has brought us to the idea that there is a lot of good security practice in the infrastructural security, in the cybersecurity space that has not yet reached cybersecurity for SAP. That was basically the starting point.
Maybe a little bit to go back to 2012. I wasn't in the Japanese world. I was a background in cybersecurity, but during that time, I had conversations a lot also with you, with different professionals in this area. And I had that feeling, and depending on those conversations, that it was largely around audit compliance, but focused on this segregation of duties or identity access management. Based off of that, I know that within Security Bridge, you guys do several stuff, not just or identity access management. What gap during that time did you see that needed to be addressed properly when it comes to SAP environments?
Well, I think I would go even further. I think when we started thinking about cybersecurity standard practices, comparing it to SAP was largely still authorization management. That actually was anticipated as SAP security. And I think till date, there are still people out there that believe that authorizations is the solution, which it isn't. I think then back in the days, we saw huge gaps in especially the transparency of our monitoring of malicious activities, like transparency of the tremendous logs that SAP writes, helping analysts to understand what's going on in the very business-oriented system, right? So, and I'm not looking for sales order has been created and stuff like that. I'm more looking for critical authorization has been assigned and has been used to a certain extent to impact integrity of the database or of the data of the system, or to steal or read data in the critical enterprise environments. But that was also only one domain, and we learned when we started actually in threat detection, right? So we implemented a threat detection solution that actually brought all the sensitive log sources together in a transparent monitoring environment. But then we realized when we had the first conversations with huge industries, actually, they said back in the day, they said, listen, we're having SAP since 8 years, but we haven't started hardening the system to the extent. And they understood that there are 2,000, maybe even more correlated system parameters in the system that have a security impact.
Yeah.
We also understood, okay, there's a requirement in vulnerability management. Yeah, how to securely configure an SAP environment to the standard that the business can still work with the necessary performance, with the necessary freedom, but still hardened enough to the point that intruders or threat actors cannot do everything on your system. Another point that was brought to us in those conversations, that's again, we're talking about 2013, 2014 then, was a significant pain. Let me explain it as pain because I think it's like manual effort, which causes a lot of issues in the organizations. And also inaccuracy in patch management. SAP does a great job, don't get me wrong, right? They are releasing patches, they are having vulnerability management, they're scanning for issues, they're fixing it. They have a responsible disclosure policy. And even our research team were reporting vulnerabilities that are found in the SAP standard product to get it fixed, right?
Yeah.
But then the burden is on the customers, the patch implementation and the detection which patches are actually relevant for the installed technical components is still to a great extent a manual effort. So okay, this is also something that we need to automate. Then
I think to ask a question, Christopher, here. I mean, this has been, you're talking 2012, 2013, 2014, to some extent 15. I mean, people still wonder, this is still going on. Have you seen a major change with organizations when they're dealing, regardless of what tool they have inside their organizations? Do you see organizations right now still suffering from the same problem you saw 10 years ago?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes.
That's the honest and cruel answer. There are still organizations that live up to a manual process in patch management, which leaves huge gaps typically based on the accuracy of the team. And I don't want to blame humans, but I think it's a natural thing that if you have iteration in the team, if you have new people with different skill sets, that something slips the cracks. And if you have an algorithm that tells you which patches are missing, then it's easier to verify that you have not missed anything. Yeah, and that's just one example, obviously, right? The same as in threat detection. There's hugely a gap in the transparency of what's going on, and also in the skill of knowing what is actually ongoing and what is a normal behavior of an SAP system and the user community, because it's not only about, oh yeah, we have an attack, it's also about finding anomalies, right? So finding unusual logs that indicate that something is ongoing. For instance, someone is locking users all across the system just to make you a denial of service, which is a very simple example. But if you're not looking at the logs, you have support tickets in your support to unlock users, and you probably start executing them until you, as of a certain frustration, you realize we are actually basically out of business and we can't keep up with the volume of unlocking the users.
Yeah.
And that's really that's really simple examples, and such things happen on a very high frequency basis. And I mean, there are more crucial things. I mean, for the likes of incidents, I think you probably also, I mean, I know that you are aware of that, but
Yeah.
also your audience is typically aware of that. There was a huge incident in a car manufacturer in UK. I don't want to name it. You can research it yourself. Which cost billion of pound and almost it could have triggered bankruptcy for that organization. So it was a tremendous incident.
I can agree with you, and I'm glad you how you ended up with this incident, because we realize that this is not a tech problem anymore. So these techies sitting in a corner, and what we try to help, what you guys try to help as well when it comes to organizations, but now it is something where C-level and to some extent the board needs to really tackle this topic. So in your opinion here, and you've been speaking to multiple companies, different levels. Why is it so hard to explain SAP cyber risk at that level, at the C level, at the board level, compared to other cyber risks? Because what we see that SAP is the core of the company. So as you said, with this incident in a car manufacturing, within seconds, an SAP system is down, they would lose so much money. So why is it so hard to explain SAP cyber risk?
I think it isn't hard, to be honest. I think everyone is
Okay.
aware of it. I think it's a question of sequence and a question of cyber maturity. Many organizations, they need to reach a certain level of maturity before they actually look at critical enterprise applications, or they need to prevent that they need to ensure that their parameter is secured, and they need to ensure that their attack surface is relatively transparent and manageable. And as of a certain moment, then there comes application security. And I think every CISO on this planet works with cybersecurity framework that suggest basically the same procedure, obviously in different sequences and in different flavors to different extents. As of a certain moment, any CISO, so Chief Information Security Officer, will probably ask the question, what are the top 10, top 5 most critical applications? I think that's a very easy question. But then they also look at experience and incidents that are happening, which is, I think, still a huge problem is that ransom, phishing, and so on is actually getting a lot of backwind at the moment because of AI and stuff like that, is not solved. And that's why it's more a priority topic. Then secondly, it's a sequencing issue because you can't do everything at once. And then it's a budgetary topic. Yeah. So when you go to the board level, and I hope if you board doesn't need to discuss technical topics. Typically, they need to know, okay, we have a certain investment in critical enterprise applications, a typical stack, which includes SAP licenses. They need to know the number. They need to ideally ask the question, how much of this budget goes into security, just to be also protected against in compliance and regulation and stuff like that, because that ultimately goes up to the C-level or to the board even if there's violation. I do believe that this question is not often asked. So what is the cybersecurity or the security portion in a specific application investment, which is also not unusual, but I wish from my perspective, it should have been asked more often, because we've seen a lot of terrible incidents in the past that could have been easily prevented. If you look at that car manufacturer, I mean, I can probably a workload or a work effort of couple of hours to speak in monetary standards, probably an investment of £10,000 or something could have prevented the entire incident, compared against now billions. I mean, it's in the news. Oh, it was in the news in September last year.
Yeah.
So I think that should be the answer to your question. I believe that sometimes, maybe I'm speaking particularly for Europe and not so much for the American market or the American user groups, we are looking for a solution. And I think security doesn't have a solution. Security is a continuous game. It's something that
Absolutely.
continuously changes. And that's also what we as a company stand for. We continuously adapt to the changing risk and the changing behavior of threat actors to help our customers to keep up with them. So this is, to a certain extent, you can say, our task and our mission. But it's not like a project that has an end, right? And
Yeah,
it's an
absolutely.
investment, and then and then it's done. It's a continuous topic.
Yeah, I mean, for organizations, security is never, you can't say security is now done and let's move on to the next project. Absolutely not. But we have
And that,
seen
I
a lot
think, maybe to add one more sentence, Wasim, because I
Yes,
think that's
absolutely.
interesting. So if the board or the C-level, the executive management team asks the question, if we spend this amount of money, is the problem solved? Or in any other flavor, how you ask the question, the answer is always no. And this is also how you easily come around the budget release, right?
Yeah.
If you want to prevent it.
Well, I see examples also with major companies around Europe that these conversations around, you said it, critical applications within an organization, they're not even discussed with cybersecurity. So they are completely siloed out. And we see that this is something, I don't know if it's because of the complexity of SAP, or do you think that maybe it is assumed that SAP is mature and safe by default? I've heard that so often in most organizations that once they start looking into it, or at least asking the right questions, they have this statement at the back of their head, at the back of their minds, that SAP is mature, it is safe by default. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you can. I mean, you can say German build quality, right?
Yeah, German made, secure by default.
No, I think you drive my thoughts in a very interesting direction. I think you're not wrong with what you say, because I heard the same
All right.
sentences. But I also believe that the cybersecurity practitioners in the organization, in any organization, they are not talking much about application risk. They are more on the network, on the infrastructure level. And SAP is a very difficult beast when it comes to security, because, I mean, you can see it as an operational system for enterprises. You can run your sales and logistic processes. It's the heart, it's the backbone of the entire logistics, but also the people and culture management, if you use those products. It is hugely interconnected with IoT or OT,
Mm-hmm.
like production plants and so on. Then there is finance processes, and their cybersecurity practitioner is not so interested in that. Yeah. And also in the finance specific interfaces, transferring text documents or whatever, it's not so much of their interest. It's not so much of their standard. Now I'm talking very long, and what I want to say is they're not talking the same language. They don't talk about, they don't know the problem.
Agreed.
And it's still a huge translation need to bring them together. The cybersecurity practitioners, the information security team, and the SAP experts. This is also where we see ourselves, right? And the security bridge is, I mean, as the name says, building a bridge between this. So we are acting as translators, but also as technical integrators. So we not only show the SAP team what's going on in the SAP system, or which configuration is maybe malicious, the vulnerable. We also send this to leading vulnerability management systems that are used in the CISO's organization. We also send it to CM solutions. We work with the infrastructure and network vendors on this planet for the likes of Fortinet. I know that Julian has also been part of your podcast earlier. Of
Yes.
course, we know each other. We also work with hyperscaler for the likes of Microsoft Azure to understand what is the requirement from that angle, because we believe security overall is only, you can only master it if you see it as a group challenge and you work together, right? I mean, the threat actors do the same, right? They are experts in specific areas, right? If typically the one that steals the credit card is not the one that uses the credit card, to be
Exactly.
very to say it very simple. And I think this is the same. We need to work way more efficient together. And that's why I believe that the CISO often struggles with that, because there's a translation gap. And of course, I think a simple statement would be, okay, we believe it's secure, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
and maybe the missing experience of an incident, because they haven't seen it, that data has been stolen or manipulated or whatsoever, is also not really helping in the decision process.
Then to ask a question here, let's say they don't see this incident, they don't see this kind of risks. In your experience, and of course in your opinion, what do they actually need to consider as cyber risk when we are talking around SAP. I struggle sometimes to call it application, because if you look into SAP, as you said, it's a monster. It has it runs different business processes. If you go deeper under the hood, you have its own proprietary programming language. It has its own proprietary protocols, sometimes for communication. So I struggle to call it an application. So from your opinion, within your opinion, when we are wanting to talk about risk and cyber risk, what would be your top three that you would go in to a CISO and explain that risk when it comes to SAP environments?
Well, I think the CISO will only look at what's the impact to the organization, depending of the use case in the particular scenario. So if you're using an SAP system to run your full production, and the SAP system is infiltrated or down to a cyber incident, then you can count the risk, the monetary risk, by the minutes of downtime. But probably there's also a few on, and I mean, had plenty of conversations. And I think it's such a wide area to answer this in one sentence. But what is the impact of reputation? Obviously, you don't want to leak customer data or something and see this somewhere, because that could be even on the news. Yeah, this is something that no organization on this planet that is has a reputation to lose, and a brand wants to see. What are the top three? It's hard to say, because I think it's a very individual use case analysis. It has to do with the risk appetite of the organization and the level of maturity in other security domains. So if they're still running unpatched WAFs, for instance, then they should probably focus on this, because external intruders, they can just jump around in the network. So I would say that a CISO is very much aware of that use case, and typically does an analysis, or has people to analyze this in a very early stage. But then I think the problem that you're pointing out is not that the CISO isn't aware, it's often that the CISO doesn't have a solution. That's more interesting.
Which is absolutely right. And the solution, and also the reliance, that what we see is that SODs, or segregation of duties, and the access management can resolve most, not if all, SAP risks. Here I'm being very, what do you call it? I'm losing my words, but here I'm being very sarcastic when it comes to that this is not the only place. When we are, or at least from that perspective of the different risks, and you say that, CISO has to really understand what is going on. Do you see teams, or have you come across teams when it comes to SAP relying heavily on audit results, on, vulnerability counts, on patching numbers? What do they usually rely on to transform that technical information to the CISO, where the CISO then decides where do they prioritize their SAP security roadmap, strategies, whatever it is? Where do they particularly rely on?
Absolutely. I think the short answer is yes. It's important to mention that in the critical enterprise application area where we are, and I think to say it in simple terms, it's a finance or a business application. Yeah, audit is a huge driver for or audit and compliance is a huge driver for the budget and for the action that is taken. Unfortunately, it's not enough. I mean, that's actually also one target of security, which we want to change the paradigm of a snapshot-driven and regular audit-driven security process more towards a real continuous security approach.
Yeah.
But here's where the difficulty starts, because there are no such tools, no such automations. I mean, I said that in the beginning in my intro. I think we're just very efficient or lazy people. We don't want to do this manual, because manual, no one has the budget to have five people sitting there and looking at the logs of an SAP system. And even if you do, it's very likely that you get security fatigue in no time. Exactly. Yeah. And now with the audit, though, it's still an important aspect, because I mean, I see organizations that are getting audit results. And I mean, the auditor coming back every year, they always find something because they will look a bit more detailed. And then they fix the audit results by priority. They call it then a risk-based approach. But then in the next audit or in the third audit iteration, they realize that some of the findings that they had in the first audit have been reopened because they haven't had controls in place that actually allowed them to ensure that those configurations are not changed anymore, that those incidents or those, for instance, patches are continuously installed and so on. So this is not the solution, but as I said, the answer is yes, that is often a driver, and I think it creates kind of a fake security perception that actually doesn't really bring the value that many people believe.
Yeah. I do agree that audit is the drive towards security. So we have come across organizations where it started out as an audit report, even though it didn't really tackle different security areas. So it didn't tackle patching. It didn't tackle, SAP security baseline controls to that extent. It only tackles areas where auditors up to this point still rely on, which is who has access to SAP all. SAP all, for those listeners not knowing, it's like having root access to your Linux box, or maybe having too many permissions for a specific role or so on. So it does drive. And I think what I am hoping to see soon with auditors is that changes, similar to what auditors outside of this SAP environment do. And maybe here is where I'd like to dive in with you on how do you see, I know that you guys do a lot of areas around detection and monitoring and visibility. How do you see shifting that theoretical risk that this might happen, this can happen, or trying to really explain to a C-level that these risks might happen, or to go to a area of observable risk? So what I mean by that is that how can we really showcase through visibility detection cyber risks? And can that be then a motive to pick up this conversation with CISOs even faster?
Yeah, definitely. First, coming back to your last point, I think the No Monkeys, you're doing a great job in also explaining that audit is not enough, and I think I need to praise you for that. Likewise, our other partners in that field. I think the industry and the experts in the industry, they have understood that audit, and don't get me wrong, audit is a necessity. It's important, and it also is often the kickoff for a longer SAP security journey. It has its benefits, but the continuous security is typically the answer. And I think you're doing also a great job in helping your customers to analyze what's ongoing in the environment and what are the continuous and the logical next steps. And that's the last sentence on your former topic is in security. There's no solution, as we said, but it's important to start, because typically the earliest action or the early actions have the hugest benefit. Yeah, the higher your level of maturity is, the more effort you need to invest, the more tools you need, the more level of detail you need to to invest in that environment before you see the leverage on that. But if you start with SAP Security, if you start with your security journey, the early steps are typically bringing you directly to a very good level of security. Now, to your question that I already forgot, can you repeat?
So, what do you think, or does detection, to summarize my question and my topic, does detection, monitoring, or the areas of trying to understand what happens help move cyber risk or SAP cyber risk conversations from what if this happened to this is actually happening?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you don't monitor, you're basically driving blindsided. How do you navigate that, right? I mean, and it's again a paradigm in security is you need to invest your resources and your budget into the right areas where you have an effect. If you don't, then the money is lost, yeah, and the investment is lost. I think that is one important element. I had another thought on this. I think there was a former defense minister of, and I'm not sure if I'm now saying it right, I think it was Rumsfeld, that has a very famous quote saying he's not afraid of the known knowns, he's more afraid of the unknown.
Okay.
And I'm not sure. Please don't curse me if I didn't get the statement right. Read it. What he essentially said, he's afraid of the risks that he doesn't see, because the risks that he sees he can control or he can assess. Now, to your question, it's obviously important that you gain transparency on what's going on in the system, how your security settings are, which missing patches you have, and which code vulnerabilities are in the system before you can decide where you invest something. So it's always, transparency is always the start before you do the strategic. And actually, what we also do is, for instance, we do test installations with prospects that typically show them that confirm them that, for instance, debug and change is actually used to bypass authorizations in the environment. They assumed it before, but they couldn't see it because there was no evidence, or they didn't have the capacity to dig out the evidence from the technical log stack. But with Security Bridge, this becomes a walk in the park, and we'll always show this already in such incidents or such things in a very short test installation.
Yeah, I think looking into, I did a forensic investigation there. They had no tool to actually at least gather the different logs, as our listeners might know or not know. There's a huge amount of logs from an SAP system. So to really put any kind of or investigate any kind of incident, you really need to look at multiple logs. So it's quite interesting how you guys do it. It's quite interesting how we see also the industry moving towards that area, or they are in that area, but how organizations see now the need into that. I want to reel in before we dive in. I'm pretty sure that we can dive into this technical topics and never be quiet, in a very nice words put it. But I want to go a little bit higher from the technical sides and go to. I'd like to hear your advice or opinion for our listeners. If you want to balance, and you probably have done this several times within Security Bridge, if you want to balance to a CISO urgency without creating fear, or without creating this fatigue that we know that happens in SOC. So this is the detection parts. How would you do that? How would you balance this kind of urgency that we need to tackle SAP security right now?
No, I think it's fact-based argumentation and discussion. I think it's not anecdotal conversations. There's enough evidence and facts that should be so convincing to the CISO that he is not feeling really motivated to carry the risk, of an AP cyber incident. And I already said that I think it's more about, it's not about convincing the CISO. If the CISO is not yet ready to listen to application security, it's probably having to do with a lack of resources, budget, deprioritization due to higher prioritizations. So, and I think CISOs are very smart people. They know their roadmap. They built that for typically for many years. But once the point comes, I think it's important that the right solution, the right strategy, and the right approach is taken. And I mean, we talked a lot about continuous security, and I think it's easily said continuous security, but it's not as easy understood. For me, let me quickly explain this to the audience. It has to do with proactive measures. That is this patching. That is
Agreed.
Secure configuration. That is monitoring the entire interfacing of an SAP system. But then on the other side, it's also being able to react to specific happenings, incidents in real time, actually, or with a very short time latency, because bigger damages can only be prevented if you act quick if something happens. And the domain in the middle is actually prevent certain things. And that is also the reason why Security Bridge has acquired CyberSafe, a solution that actually helps customers with adding a new level of security in authentication, and even in before activities are happening. Like, for instance, we can ask for a multi-factor challenge if a specific activity in an SAP system is conducted. And that's the third domain that you need to have under control, or the third, pillar, for the lack of a better word, that you need to address under the continuous security.
I do agree on this continuous security, the proactivity. We actually preach it a lot, proactivity. We also try to really address how a risk. So in my former times out of the Japanese world, within a SOC, our main goal was to really put in measures, or at least for the entire cybersecurity office, is put in measures to slow down attackers, because we know nothing is 100%. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, as they say, a organization will be attacked, but putting those measures. And I think with this continuous, I would like to maybe summarize it with this continuous security, proactive security, is putting those pillars into a place where we are slowing down attackers from actually reaching the part of causing any disruptions, extracting any data, causing any kind of big mess that an organization doesn't want. So these pillars would help then, I would imagine, SAP or SOC, depending on how they are in that organizations, really detect an attack when they have these areas. So this is what I've summarized within your continuous security, that is quite strong, I would believe, when it comes to also in terms of SAP security. So that's an important point.
And Wasim, what I really like, I mean, you're the perfect example, right? You came from cybersecurity into, how did you say, Japanese world? Which kind of indicates already there's a different lingo, there's a different challenge. There is a lot of things to learn. I mean, also from your perspective, maybe what is your learning when you made that move?
Wow. Well, several learnings actually. One is, I think we said it, SAP was considered as it can be protected by identity access management and segregation of duties. It is isolated in somewhere in the organization that no one can access, or an attacker can't access. I did realize that from a CISO or level, well, not a CISO level, but the entire cybersecurity domain, they're very far away from an SAP environment, SAP application. It is particularly managed, which it should, managed by SAP basis, regardless of the different teams, authorization, managed and secured by the SAP basis, but also the SAP basis teams do not have the security mentality that a cybersecurity can provide to them in terms of protecting the system together. And that's what I realized. I realized there's a lot of silos there. And how can we really connect those different teams?
Yeah,
was
maybe
it easy?
To add it.
Still not easy. But
I mean, an SAP competence center is not only SAP basis, and it shouldn't be the only one that is responsible for cybersecurity of SAP. There was, in fact, a survey in 2018, between 2018 and 2020, in the German industry, who is responsible for SAP security? Multiple answers were possible, from the CISO to SAP basis. In fact, it was the answers were 68%. It's SAP basis is the responsible. And I always bring up that anecdote, because in many conversations that I had with SAP basis people, they are not aware that they have that mandate. So I think it's also important, and that's why I'm bringing it up, that there needs to be a mandate for SAP security. The executive management needs to provide a clear mandate, and then they need to, and a good management typically does that, listen to the technical experts if they are telling them about risks, about incidents, about budget needs or resource constraints in that area. And with that, I think there would be a lot easier conversations in the area of SAP cybersecurity.
I like that. Well, before we start dialing it down, because I think me or you can get to some extent enough within this topic, which some people sometimes call boring, but nonetheless, I have two final questions for you. And this is more towards your thoughts, your core questions, at least in terms of what you want to leave to the audience. So if you had to leave one message about SAP cyber risk to C-levels, to technical people, I will leave you to choose that. What should they remember? Hard one or?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, you can summarize it under the risk is real, and you said it already. It's not about the if, it's about the when. It will happen. Yeah. Well, we've seen it, and I brought it up in the beginning of our conversation.
Yes.
It was all over the news. It had almost put a company into bankruptcy. It could have costed um, thousands of jobs, and it was actually a very simple root cause, yeah, that could have been
Yeah.
fixed easily. But I think if I would like to bring something to the audience, is I think when it comes to SAP security, is don't look for perfection. Perfection is the enemy of good. Get it started. Because if you look at the first steps in every domain of SAP security, being monitoring, be it vulnerability management, and so on, typically you find the real glaring issues and you fix glaring issues at the early state, the low-hanging fruits, and those really have a security impact, a protection impact. So if you look at the overall solution or at an overall solution to solve the problem of cybersecurity, it's it's not possible, right? And it's an investment that you typically don't want to bury. So there's a certain risk that you need to always carry on, and you need to understand that when there is no solution, it's more like a game that you need to continuously play. Yeah, we are on the defender side,
Yeah.
and there are attackers, and we are playing defense. Yeah, and this game changes continuously, and it's good. Well, the protection starts only if you start playing the game.
I agree. So, to my final question before we close our episode today, and I want to tackle even that you started 2012, you saw a whole bunch of stuff until today, 2026. In your thoughts, what do you think is going to change in the next 10 years, 5 years, or must change in how SAP risk is discussed? Because as you mentioned, you have...
There's a lot. There's a lot, actually. We could fill a full episode about that question.
Okay.
I think in very short, it's AI, it's the cloud drift. I don't say shift, it's more a drift, because I think there are many organizations that don't want to put their critical enterprise applications directly or the data in the cloud,
Yeah.
but there's a benefit of doing that. That's why it's a drift, yeah. And sometimes it's a pod. It's not a shift of a lift and shift. It's more a gradual process, and that adds complexity. And that's also another challenge that you need to factor in security. If you're already running short in resources to monitor the current scenario, and you add a lot of other vulnerable scenarios to your tech stack, that will be a challenge. Is on the one hand side probably can be an accelerator for the problem, to say, to speak very generic. And on the defender side, it can also help. So we also work with AI and use large language models in our solution to explain risks more transparent, and also help suggesting solutions that are efficient and easy to achieve. I think that's the answer to the question of the points that are coming to my mind.
Amazing. So, Christoph, it was a pleasure to have you. I know, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have you again here soon to do part 2, but it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you for tackling SAP security together with No Monkey, and hope to see you soon.
It was a pleasure from my side. Thanks for having me, and I'm happy to come back anytime.